sure Danny heard about the really good sermon on Sunday morning, haven't you?
Yeah.
That was so awesome.
Kyle did good, huh?
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
Did a good job.
There's good and there's evil, there's no in between. You got a choice.
May the fourth be with you.
Yeah. There we go. That. Okay. I think. Good here. Let me let Ed know what's up here.
Yeah.
Hey, long time no see.
Hey, good.
Oh, she's glad.
How are ya?
I'm
It's gonna be an honors geometry next year.
I only got 3 wrong out of 70.
I graded it immediately.
Yeah. They were
They're all
gonna do
sitting there watching her grade.
they were gonna do like this,
What was the cutoff?
yeah. But then that wasn't like working, so she just did it by hand, and it was really quick because it was just like the dots.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but so it's not. I think it's like 10 minutes before we had to.
Wow. Did everybody else take the whole time too? Yeah, 70 questions is a lot.
Yeah, I think most people. Personally. Then if you get to the trouble,
Yeah. I have it sometimes.
Kyle and Haley, do you guys need a
There's that,
copy?
and then yours comes on top. Why are you-
Hey, yeah.
you know, she just did it like one at a time.
Yeah, I know.
You guys want to?
For you to abstain, like, they turned it in first, but then you came out chairs, and she's just taking off the top. I always feel bad about that.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Looking at Abraham, lesson 1 here, the life of Abraham and faith counted as righteousness. And let's go ahead and get started with a word of prayer, then we'll get into this. All right, let's pray. Good evening, Father. We are so thankful for this good day you've blessed us with. Beautiful day, sunshine, nice weather that we've been able to enjoy. And we pray, Lord, that as we've gone through this day, we would be a praise to your glory in the way that we have gone through this day so far. And Lord, where we have fallen short, we pray that you forgive us. Help us to see our shortcomings, to recognize those, and to humble ourselves before you and strive to be more and more like you for who you are for us and who you want us to be for you. And we thank you that you have sent your Son to be that sacrifice for us, and appreciate how you show love to us and what that looks like so that we can be guided by that in this life. And now as we open up into the study of your word, help us, Lord, as we learn from the life of your servant Abraham and learn from his faith that he had, that you have so greatly praised him for, and pray that our faith might be challenged and increased by what we learn from him and learn from your word. And it's in Jesus we pray and thank you. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Okay, so we're looking at Abraham, and we're in Genesis chapter 11, verse 10, all the way through chapter 12 and verse 3. So this section that deals with, all the fun part of genealogy, reading names and all that kind of stuff. But there's actually some interesting stuff going on with this. Let's go ahead and look at the intro statement here that I've got down on the sheet. That Abram was a 9th generation descendant of Shem. Can you even like still contact people who are like 9 generations away from you? Yeah, not even close. And at this time, Shem is still alive when Abraham's alive. This just blows my mind to think of that. So 9 generations, Shem being the 10th away from Abraham, or vice versa. Lifespans have slowly decreased, and with that, you kind of have all of a sudden it shifts into the 400s for like 3 generations, and then it drops into the 200s for another few generations, and then just below the 200s into the 100s, the last 3 as we approach Abram. Abram's lifespan would only amount to 175 years. Only, right? Only. 175 years. A third of Shem's total lifespan. And based on the genealogies, Shem, who lived 600 years, would have been alive through most, if not all, of Abram's life. And so we'll take a look at the chronology chart, but you have that there. Did they live near each other? Did they ever interact with each other? Did Abram hear stories about the flood straight from the horse's mouth? And these are the kind of questions I think that are really intriguing. It's like, what kind of interactions took place here? And, or at least he wasn't that far removed from the individuals who would have been sharing the stories of the flood. So, continuing on, one thing is for certain, out of all the individuals mentioned, just in Shem's line, God chose Abram, not the others. He chose and called Abram. And so let's explore what this calling involved for Abram and see what we learn about God in the process and apply it to our lives. So it's interesting to me who he chooses here out of all the different people in this line, and then other people who are alive on the earth after the flood. People have begun to really multiply. There's no doubt about that. And God chose Abram here. And the text doesn't even directly say, though we get, we seem to get more of a hint at least about that along the way. And it does seem to be that Abraham's faith really stands out. It's what stood out about Noah. It's what stood out about Enoch. He walked with God. It's what stood out about descendants of Seth as it comes all the way down here to Noah and then beyond. And those descendants who began to call upon the name of the Lord, the descendants of Seth would. And that really stands out along the way. So it's standard reason that it's because of Abram's faith and his faithfulness and his character quality that really would seem to stand out. But we'll see some interesting things here, I think, about him as we learn about him. In fact, let's get into question 1. Before we do that, one other thing I wanted to say, as we look through the story of Abraham, I want you to pay attention to the things that God is doing. Pay particular attention about how God talks, how God does things, when he steps in and matters, because God doesn't always just step in and matters, right? It's not just, we dare not say that it's just random. God steps in to interact with Abraham at specific times. And so God's intervention, as it were, and paying attention to that when God chooses to step in and intervene, or to just simply speak to him, show himself to him. So let's pay attention to those things, but even specifically how God talks. The kinds of things that he's about with what he says as he deals with Abraham, and then think about how that works with how God deals with us, and what it is for us to really know more about the character of God, how he operates, the kinds of ways that he talks. Because the way that God talks, even as we read throughout Genesis, there are very deliberate statements being made, things recorded for us to learn about him along the way. So this is neat stuff. So question 1 here. What do you learn about Abram from his introduction in the Genesis record in chapter 11, verses 10 through 32? And then also I threw in another verse here. This isn't part of the introduction, but chapter 20, verse 12 gives a little bit more insight. But what do you learn about Abram just from the genealogy stuff, and then what few statements really are made about him, or maybe even thinking about things that aren't said about him that you kind of were thinking, I kind of would have thought that should have been a thing said, right? So why is what's said? Why are the things not included yet in this introduction? But what do you see? What do you see? What do you learn about Abram in this intro about him?
He was the son of Terah.
Okay, so he's the son of Terah. What's that?
Terah.
Yeah, and that's Terah would be actually probably more accurate there. What else? So the son of Terah. Let's talk family life for a moment. What do you learn about his family life? This is mainly what we're kind of learning. We know he's got a father.
He's got brothers.
He's got brothers. How many?
2, looks like.
Yeah. So he's got 2 brothers. What are their names?
Nahor and Haran.
Easy for you to say. So just your average run-of-the-mill Aramean names. Nahor and Haran. So there's a place that ends up being named Haran, which seems like, was that the name of the place? I mean, well, where they, because he's going to go there, right? And is that named because of his brother, or is that somebody else? I mean, don't know. What else about Abram that you learned here about him?
His brother Haran died.
Okay, so Haran dies. When in the scheme of things? In his journeys? I mean, before,
So it was before,
after, middle, during things?
Before they left, they were still in Ur
Yeah.
of the Chaldeans.
So now we kind of start to wonder, man, I wonder how old his brother would have been when he died. We're only given some specifics about Abraham's age, right? Is there anything that talks about his age yet in any of this? No. When we kind of get going along, we're going to see that when Abraham is called by God, when he's in Haran and he's making his journey through Canaan, how old is he there? Does anybody recall? So he's 75. Yeah, he's 75. But then that begs the question, how old is he when he's, before that point? Like how long is he in Haran? Of course, I think I bring up some...
Younger than 75.
So yeah, there you go, younger than 75. So there are some things that we can do a little bit of math. In fact, in one of the questions I asked you to do a little bit of math. We'll get to that in a second. But take a look at Genesis chapter 20 and verse 12. And oops, I didn't mean to go that far ahead. Genesis 20 and verse 12. And here's Abraham trying to stand up for himself and argue something because he had lied about Sarah and her connection to him. This is the second time. He's lied twice about her and had her lie about it, right? That say that you're not my wife. Say that you're my sister. Now, when he's called to the carpet on it, because he's spotted kissing her. And, oh man, kissing your sister? What's wrong here? And then, Genesis 20 verse 12, here he is saying, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So wait a second. What is the relation here?
A half-sister.
she'd be his half sister. Well, that just makes everything okay then. Does it?
It's a half lie.
It's a half lie. Yeah, that's right. Wait, so we're talking with, let's say, we're talking with somebody who's never read or never learned about the story of Abraham, and they're reading through this, and they come to this stuff, and they go, wait a second, this guy's married to his half sister. Will that fly in our culture today? Would that be weird for somebody today? Yeah, absolutely. Boy, don't even take them all the way back to Adam and Eve and their children and what that must have been like, right? Is this okay?
Yeah. Back then.
What? Okay, what changes? How is it okay then and not okay now?
Something a whole lot genetically changed. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't.
There are genetically pure, not as many terminal genes that compound in intermarriages.
Yeah. So we know, like, through genetic studies, at least now, with so many different genes in the pool, that the closer you get to family, then that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, the more
higher percentage of problematic genes and mutations and all that kind of stuff, right? So there are laws in our land right now that are against incest. Thank you. I almost just said inbred, but inbreeding,
That too.
right? Yeah. Well, even look at animals in breeding animals and like having purebreds. Any problems that exist for them?
Yeah, they get more problems.
They do experience more like health problems, right? And
Psychological even.
and psychological, right? Yeah. So it's interesting. So, but they're trying to keep with certain traits that are there that they want to stay maintained and not get messed with by other genes getting into the picture, right? And there's a certain risk that's there. Well, and so what comes along though in God's law, once we get to Moses and God giving his law, that he would tackle some of those things in the law specifically, and he would say, here's the line now, here's where the cutoff is with marrying someone who's an immediate relative, right? So God would actually make a law. So before God makes that law to Moses, where do we stand with that? What had God said about relationships between a man and a woman? All he said was, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Those were the parameters at that time, right? The population had to get going somehow. So while it's just absolutely weird for us to think about, there are other things that come into the picture for being able to. How's it going? Here you go. You want to give him one of those, Mark? Yep. Good to have you with us. We're studying about Abraham and his righteousness, as the scriptures talk about. So we're in Genesis chapter 11 and 12. So as we look at now more things that we learn about Abraham, or Abram, we're going to call him because that's what he's still called right now. As we look more at Abram, we see some of the picture of what's going on in the culture. What do you know about Ur of the Chaldees? Was there anything that gave us any hint about his hometown? Where he's living? There really was. It just told us where, right? That's just where he's residing. So there's a lot of interesting things as you start to read about Ur of the Chaldees. I had put in here a quote, and on the paper, the lesson sheet, Ur's economic life was centered on trading and imports. Wealth and greed were all around, and one could just breathe them in the air. That's just kind of a quick little statement about how things actually, it was a well-to-do area, Ur of the Chaldees. And homes, I was reading something that said homes would have consisted of up to as many as like maybe 20 rooms. but their rooms would be, they were like pretty small, historically. And spiritually, the city built on self became even more corrupted by the idolatry of material things, high social positions and wealth, by amassing fortunes tainted by the blood of exploited slaves. When you read about that, all that stuff, does that sound all that different from stuff in our time? People focused on self, seeking to amass wealth, all of that, and being corrupted by the idolatry of material things, high social positions, Okay. And even then, like slave labor that's abusive here, that it goes on to mention. And then the city's patron deity was Nana, the Sumerian and Akkadian moon god. So they're worshiping the moon. Who's worshiping the sun? Who was about sun worship?
Egyptians.
Yeah, the Egyptians were, really. But I mean, and while they kind of shared gods, right? And they had multiple gods, the moon god was of particular interest to them in a big point of emphasis. The ruins of the ziggurat of Ur. You know what a ziggurat is? Does anybody know what a ziggurat is?
It's like a temple, right?
Yeah, it's basically like a temple. It's a very big structure, almost like a pyramid, but they would have like stairs going way up to the first level. And then you would have entrance into that temple area, and then you would have more built on top of that, almost pyramid-ish type of a thing. It's also thought that the Tower of Babel would have been of similar structure, because they've unearthed a ziggurat in Ur that dates back to about Abraham's time as well, like just a little after his time. So, and it contained the shrine of Nana. They were partially restored, and they're still visible today. So pretty fascinating that that's the case. So Abraham is centered in his living in an idolatrous place, right? So back to the question here, stuff about the introduction to him. What insight does Joshua 24, verse 2 and 3 give us into Abram's life before God's calling of him that the Genesis record doesn't include? So what do you find from Joshua 24, verses 2 through 3 about him? I've got it up here on the screen as well if you want to take a look at that. Sarah, let's just read that, and then you can tell me what you see in here. Joshua said to all the people, so this is after Moses leads the people through the wilderness. Joshua takes them into the promised land. They do all their conquering. And this is at the end of all of that. And he says to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac." All right, what does Joshua 24, verse 2 and 3 tell us about Abraham that the introduction doesn't share with us about him? What do you see there?
But he was involved in idolatry too.
Isn't that what it sounds like?
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like it when he says, your fathers and lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and father of Nahor, and they. So who's they? Well, it's just kind of everybody he just talked about, right? Terah, Nahor, Abraham, and then also their fathers. And what does it say? And they served other gods. Wait a second. Abraham was idolatrous? I looked into that a little bit, and there's actually Jewish writings in tradition from like 300 to 500 AD writings that they go on to write some stories about Terah and Abraham. And actually, one of the stories is about Terah actually owning his own shop where they made and sold idols. Now, as to the accuracy of this, I mean, this is just other Jewish writings that we have that doesn't have any foundation of anything beyond just the fact that it was written 300 to 500 years after Christ. So this is a long ways away from the time of Abraham. The question is, what has Jewish tradition done? Now, over time, people maybe make up stories, right? Who knows? But in the story kind of goes on that Abraham's in there and he's, Terah's away from the shop, and Abraham's a man who is 50 years old comes in and he wants to buy an idol. He sells him an idol, and Abraham kind of like pokes fun at him he goes, how old are you? He goes, I'm 50. He says, you're going to worship an idol that's a day old? And you're 50? You're older than that thing, and you're going to worship that thing? How much truth in this? I don't know at all, because the Bible doesn't say anything to that whatsoever, other than this statement right here, which really, this may have been the thing that sort of prompted some of that storytelling. I think what may have been going on for Terah and for Abraham and Nahor. But wait a second. If Abraham was involved in idolatry, if he was involved with worshiping the moon god in Ur, why is God calling Abraham?
Why does he call any of us?
Okay, that's it, right? So, we shouldn't be so much troubled by it as we should actually be able to see God called him. Notice, he calls him to leave Ur of the Chaldees, right? In fact, that kind of gets us into the next question, so let's do this. What caused Abraham to move from his home country, and again from his second dwelling? So what's his first dwelling place is Ur of the Chaldees. Where's his second dwelling place?
Canaan.
Oh man, what happened here? I didn't mean to do that.
Or Haran.
Okay, what's going on here? Let's get to that. Where's question 2? There we are, question 2. So they go to Haran, which is a few hundred miles just north of where they were, so that's a long ways to go. But what causes him to leave there? Leave Ur of the Chaldees.
His dad, right?
Yeah, so Genesis 11:31 says something to this, right? Where Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldees in order to enter the land of Canaan. And they went as far as Haran and settled there. So Terah is the one who says, all right, let's go, boys. By the way, there was another little tidbit of another family connection, somebody by name in here we didn't mention yet. What's Lot's connection to Abraham?
Nephew.
To Abram. Yeah, he's his nephew. Who's he the son of?
Haran.
Yeah, so he's the son of Haran and grandson of Terah. So Lot is a part of this picture now. So Abram's nephew, we'll see more stories about him when we get to chapter 13. And then, so they leave. Is there any other reason that he leaves Ur of the Chaldees? Because right when we start chapter 12, we have what happening? God's calling Abram, right? But at this time in chapter 12, when he's calling him, where is he? He's in Haran. So when does God call him? Just when he's in Haran? when we look at Acts chapter 7 and verses 2 through 4, take a look at this. This is Stephen, and he is preaching to some of the Jews. And here's what he has to say about this. And he said, "Hear me, brethren and fathers, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, leave your country and your relatives, and come into the land that I will show you. Then he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled at Haran. From there, after his father died, God had him move to his country in which you are now living." This country in which you are now living. All right, so why does he leave Ur of the Chaldees?
Sounds like it's God called him.
God called him. But I thought Terah's the one who said, let's go, boys.
Maybe he was just following Abram.
Yeah. Well, and so it might even stand to reason. Abram goes, so Dad, the Lord, Yahweh, just spoke to me. He told me, get out of here. We need to leave. We need to move. And whatever may have transpired in that, this is how I imagine it going down. And his father goes, well, if that's what the Lord told you, then let's do this. So Terah, ultimately, I mean, he is the tribal leader. He is the patriarch. And everyone else in that culture, they would have been living around each other. In fact, it's very likely they're living on the same property. They may even be in the same house. In fact, talking with Surrender here, he shared with me. He said that back home in India, that he and his wife and their son and his brothers and their wives, also, they lived in their parents' house. These are grown men, married men. Like here in our country, we look at it and go, that's more the exception to the rule than it is the thing that's actually going on, right? But in that culture, even still today, it is, they exist together, they live in the same place, the same house together, and they have houses with more rooms, but they also have a property that they're running. In fact, Surrender on their property, all the men, all the sons of his father would help with the property. They would help, they grew rice on their land. They did farming, and they all had a part in that. So here they are, just like their lives are centered around their family staying and working together, and then who's going to take over when dad is gone, kind of a thing. And no, really not all that different from what would have been going on here with all that. So dad says, all right, let's go ahead and go. But perhaps because Abram says, this is what God told me, so they go ahead and they leave. Where are they going? Where did God tell them to go?
So the land he'd show him.
Yeah, to a land that he would show them. So can you imagine us going, well, which way? Yeah, certainly God had to have been directing which way they're going, because he says, I'm going to let you know. But he didn't say right out of the gates, like, hey, you're going to end up over here in the land of Canaan. You're going to go where the Canaanites are. Why doesn't God reveal that right out of the gates and just tell them, look, here, I want you to pick up and move. You're going all the way to Canaan. You think you might have known something about the Canaanites? Hey, you want me to go to that land? What's wrong with right here? And how is that any different? Those guys, I know some things about those guys. For whatever reason, God decides not to tell him where, but he says, I'll show you. Now that's kind of interesting that God says, I'll show you. But then, so God talks to him again. So chapter 12, and in verse 1 through 3, it is either a rewind to Ur of the Chaldees, or it is the second time that God has spoken to him, and when he's in Haran, as Stephen pointed out, God talked to him before, and then again when he's, and tells him, hey, get out of Haran and let's get going. And I'm going to show you where to go. So it's possible Genesis 12 is actually the second time that God has spoken to him. Either way you slice it, it's God talking to him. And let's see, so we talked about where does he go and settle. We talked about that. How old would he have been when he moved from his home country? Anybody have an answer for that?
I thought you said 75 on it.
So,
No, from his own country.
Oh,
yeah, from his home country. So this is kind of one of those research things. If you're good at math, then you could kind of work it back. Because we're told something happened significantly. We're told about a number in Haran. What happens in Haran?
So his dad.
Yeah, it has to do with his dad. It indicates something about his dad, and there's a number given.
His dad dies when he's 205.
Yeah, his dad dies, he's 205. But then when we go back up into the genealogy, we get back up into here, and we see how old, it talks about how old Terah was when he had Abram. And so then we can kind of do some of the math and go, oh, okay, if he was this old when he had him, and he was this old when he died, and then doing the math, it basically comes out to he would have ended up leaving Ur of the Chaldees when he was about 60, which means they would have been in 15 years in Haran. And then at 75 is when he really begins his trek to Canaan and his journeys through Canaan and all of that. So he's actually, it's been a while before God has called him. He's 60 years old. Of course, he lives to be 175. So he's like a third-ish kind of a way, right, through his life. So it's like him being 33, I guess, something to that effect. Okay, let me fast forward here, get back up to these questions here. Oh, here's a statement. This was kind of interesting that I saw in Alfred Edersheim had this statement about Abram. With Abram, an entirely new period may be said to begin. He was the ancestor of a new race in whom the divine promises were to be preserved, and through whom they would finally be realized. It seemed, therefore, necessary that when Abram was called, he should forsake his old home, his family, his country, and his people, not to speak of the dangers which otherwise would have beset his vocation. A new beginning required that he should be cut off from all that was behind. What's Alfred Edersheim going on about Abram there and leaving Ur of the Chaldees?
that it was a clean break from his old life
Yeah.
and start anew.
Yeah, so think about this. This actually kind of leads us into question 3 here, is what does God's calling involve for Abram's life?
Yeah, leaving everything behind.
Yeah, so look at this. He's breaking from the familiar, the place that he grew up. He's breaking from everything. Maybe that might have been just comfortable living for him. Maybe there were some things that were, certainly there were things in that city that were upsetting to the soul. And as we've read, it seems like Abraham was caught up in some of those things that were upsetting to the soul, idolatry. And God's calling him out of it. This is God, and like Dorinda said earlier, like this is God's using him, even though he's in a place in his life that needs changing. Isn't this how God works? He calls people to change. He calls us to change. He doesn't want us to stay in our lives where we are focused on the wrong things, but he sees something about Abraham, and when God says, Abraham, go, what does Abraham do? He goes. Is that not a standout heart quality that says, if God says it, I'll drop it and I'll be about it and I'll do it? That's faith. So, what does God's calling involve for Abram's life? It definitely involved a whole lot of faith to say, I don't even know where I'm going, but God just told me to go, so he said he'll show me. And then 15 years go by after he's been at Haran, and God goes, this isn't it either. Keep on trucking. And I almost wonder if God sort of let that time go by in Haran for these 15 years for him to be there, because his dad dies there. Maybe his dad started doing not well and couldn't really travel well. And God goes, we're just going to let this play out. And then Abraham, then it's time to get going again. It almost seems like what might be the case. It's interesting, the mercy of God that comes into the picture when God has a plan and life happens, right? And God works with it too. And keeps Abraham point forward. Abraham had perhaps a whole lot of reasons to look behind him and have things pulling for him to stay. But also, what else from Genesis 12 verses 1 through 3, what else stands out in that text for Abram's life that the calling, God calling him might involve? What did you see from that text?
Promises.
Okay, so there are promises going on. And what kinds of promises? And how many?
3, really.
So that's usually what we focus on. And what are the 3?
The land promise.
Yeah.
Make a great nation, and everyone will be blessed through you.
Yeah, they can take you to a land I'm going to show you. You're going to be a great nation. And down at the very bottom, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So, we look at that. Nation, land, and, well, the blessing, right? But I want you to notice, and this is really kind of goes with, question 4. Because I think there are more promises that are actually going on here than just 3. I've always heard all my life taught Abraham was given 3 promises. Really, we could say between this and chapter 17. Chapter 17, some commentators say there's as many as 7 promises that God is making to Abraham, more elaborated upon. And we'll get to that when we get to chapter 17. But there are some things that are going on here with even the blessing promise. How would God specifically bless Abram? Take a look. There are some of these verses here. So Genesis 12, 1 through 3, when we look at the blessing stuff, just look at this again. So there is a statement. He says, and I will bless you. And what did he sneeze or something? No. I will bless you and make your name great. So the greatness, and his making his name great, seems like it's coupled with this blessing, but it's also more like, I'll bless you and I'll make your name great. By the way, this whole promise of making his name great, how big is that to him, do you think? Like if we're to take these, if God says to you, I'm going to make you famous. When we die, when we're gone from here, what do we want to leave behind?
Legacy of righteousness.
Yeah, we want to leave people want to leave behind some kind of a legacy, right? What do you want your legacy to be? What a lot of people want today, in fact, making your name great is a really big draw today as well, right? In what ways do you see today, like, making a name great is a thing? How do you see it, like, really alive and in action?
Just like in our media, or, actors, actresses, sports heroes, social media even. People are looking for status and to be known.
Yeah, when I look in the news, I see things oftentimes that might be stated about this particular person who has quite a following in social media, and they've got this many followers. They had this post that had this many likes, this many views. They have this many followers. And look at that kind of stuff. That's a very real. That's a really thing. Yeah. How many do you have now, Haley? She's like, don't bring me into this. So, but for some people, that carries a lot more weight as far as their identity. Like, right? It's a status thing, and it becomes sort of almost like a war for who's bigger, who has more notoriety, kind of a thing. And then there's also, I mean, not that everyone's caught up in that, but that does become a big point of emphasis for people. I've got this many followers, I've got this many people who are looking at what I'm all about and all that kind of stuff. And for them, that really says something, and it's an identifier for them. But God says, I'm going to make your name great. But here's the thing. How would Abram's name be made great? Like, what would that be about? What we know of Abram.
Through all his children and the nation, and having Jesus come through his line.
Yeah. So he's promised him a nation, right? And by the way, isn't it going to be a nation that all the other nations are, supposed to look up to? That's a part of it. Like, all your descendants, it's not just that you're going to have children, which, by the way, what we have learned about him at this point is he and Sarai don't have any kids, can't have any kids. How old is she? How old is he? So we're looking at 75. If they haven't, and she's 10 years behind him, by the way. And so for them, they're past the age of childbearing, right? In fact, even today, what's kind of the geriatric childbearing age, as they kind of call it? Even younger than that, 35.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I know you have to have all those tests because they think, you might be special.
Yeah. But, and it's just showing like, hey, you must be on this, and you're starting to run into, higher risks that are there. Well, they're really past childbearing age, and God is promising him and telling him, first, go to this land. I'll tell you about it later. I'll let you know when you get there. I'll show it to you. I'll point it on the map. I don't know, however he was going to do that. But I will, I'm going to make you a great nation. And in you, some translations say in your seed, or later he'll talk about in your seed, or your offspring, through your offspring, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Offspring, what offspring? Right? So, and this is going to become a joke for them later, right? They're going to laugh about it. The whole notion of Sarah having a kid, they're going to laugh at it. She's going to laugh, and we're going to see more about that. But so this blessing, make your name great. But then there's another statement. So you shall be a blessing. So I'm going to bless you, but then you're going to be a blessing. Oh, more, just one other thing to that. God blessing him and making his name great. So Abram's name is going to be centered around what's the one thing that ends up being attached, the one quality that ends up being attached very much to Abram.
Faith.
His faith, right? That's what we're studying about. His faith. So in his name being great, that's going to direct other people to faith in the God who does all of this for him. Guess what his name and his reputation is going to be about? God's name being made great. You see it? God goes, I'm going to make your name great, but guess what? Your name being great is actually going to blow up my name and make my name great because of who you're going to be and all that, right? So I'm going to bless you so that you, in turn, can bless me and draw others to me. So you shall be a blessing, and then look at this, and I will bless those who bless you. So you'll be a blessing. Other people are going to be blessed because of you. And then that's more, or other people are going to, I will bless those who bless you. But then this last one, other people are going to be blessed because of you. Do you see all the different angles of the way that God's dealing with blessing for Abraham? 1, I'm just going to bless you. 2, you're going to be a blessing. 3, when other people bless you, I'm going to bless them. And then because of you, everybody in the whole wide world is going to be blessed. Does that have any kind of a pull to you? If God says any of these things to you, like blessing to a whole lot of different angles and degrees. Blessing. First, what's blessing? What's the idea behind it? What does it mean? What does blessing mean?
Good things.
Good.
to happen
Good
to
things.
you.
Oftentimes we might define it as happiness. When Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount would say, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, blessed are. You know, happy are, a lot of times people, commentators will say that's kind of how you should translate it. Happy are, contented are, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, okay, there's that. But between Genesis 1 and Genesis 12, go back and look over how blessing is talked about. Blessed, blessed, blessed. Even in Genesis chapter 1, verse 22, God blessed them, that is his creatures that he made in creation, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. What is blessing connected to?
Fruitfulness.
Fruitfulness. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. In chapter 1, verse 28, God blessed them, that is man, after he made man in his image. And God said to them, here's the blessing. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over it, over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So what does the blessing involve? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and take care of it. Take care of it. It's a blessing to rule over or to be responsible for God's other blessings in this life. Treat it well. Do well by it. And in all of that, and keep on going down through Genesis, and every time you see something about blessing, God blessed Noah, Genesis 9:1. He blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then we finally get to chapter 12. So there are a few other places where he talks about blessing them. Chapter 5, verse 2, when he created the male and female, he blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. So a lot of this blessing ends up being centered around multiplying, fruitfulness. Look, this is the center of it. Now think about what would be the opposite of blessing.
Curse.
Yeah, look at it right up there. And the one who curses you, down toward the bottom, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And what's the curse about? Look, think of it, Adam and Eve's, the first curse that took place. What happened?
They were
Thrown out of the garden.
thrown out of the
The blessing was undone, right? They got kicked out of the garden. They no longer had access to the thing that would cause life to continue or to be prolonged. Fruitful, multiply, right? From that standpoint, life is connected to blessing. Blessing and curse is centered around life, death, things being given to you, added to you, multiplied, or things being taken away, kind of a thing. And so God does this here. But then he says, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. What's that blessing about? How will all the world, and you think even Abraham even understands this, how are you going to bless all the earth through me?
It's Jesus Christ.
Okay, so Paul in Galatians 3 is going to spell it out and say, that's talking about Jesus. When Jesus comes into the world, he dies and he takes away the sins of all who would come to him in faith. That's blessing the world. He extended this blessing, this opportunity of hope and life eternal through his death, through his life, all of that. Now, if God says something like this to you, in you, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. In other words, a descendant from yours, way on down the line, is going to really contribute to making things a blessing where it's just a curse in their life, and he's going to turn lives around for God. What would you think about that? Would that be a selling point for you? Would you even think like, me? God, you're going to use me to somehow bless the earth? Let me ask you this. Does God want to use you to bless the earth? His creation. Yeah. Think about even that blessing extending far beyond our own earthly life, as long as this earth remains. Well, God's already accomplished that in sending Jesus, but now he wants that blessing to be perpetuated by our faith and spread to the world still. For us to be a blessing to others and not just be about, God, what are you going to bless me with in this life? Some people, so think about people focus on really, God, how can you bless me? Just the yellow one. God, how can you bless me? What about even just get to that next step so that I can be a blessing as well? Isn't that why God blesses in the first place, so that we'll be a blessing? What did Jesus say? It is more blessed to give than to receive. You shall be a blessing to others, which now all of a sudden makes me think in terms of, how can I be a blessing to other people? I can be a blessing to other people with my faith in God as well. And how can I be that person who has people blessing me? I will bless those who bless you. Here's the question. Do you want other people blessed? Do you want other people cursed because they curse you? God's emphasizing justice as well, that in all of this. I'm going to do well with this blessing thing, and don't worry about it. When people are against you, they're opposed to you. When people are with you, I'll make sure stuff goes well for that. And when people are going to be opposed to you, don't worry, I'll take care of that too. In other words, trust in me to be the person of justice in your life, right? And I'm going to be that blessing. So it's actually what unfolds here is really neat in all of that. Let's get to this. Oh, it's time to stop. So we'll stop with this because, well, actually, we really did kind of answer some of question 5 on this. Oops. Question 5 was, what does it mean that Abraham will be a blessing, and that in him all the families of the earth will be blessed? We just kind of rolled right over into that one, but that's all right. So we'll pick up next time with questions 6 and 7, and then be getting into, and I'll have another question sheet and everything to hand out to everybody. But this, it'll be chapter 12, so we'll be looking at all of chapter 12. We may even be venturing into chapter 13 with the progress depending on how things go here, because now we're going to get into Abram's journey. But with that, what's something significant that you have seen from what we've just discovered from Abram? Maybe a kind of a takeaway that you have from tonight, something that stood out to you about either Abram or a real, spiritual lesson that you gained from what's going on, what we've discovered so far. Yeah, Mark?
Well, I think I've never heard before that this took some time from when God called him, and that he didn't just leave right away.
Yeah.
I always thought God called him and bam, he was out.
Yeah.
This
process.
It even, didn't even happen in the place where thought it was. You know, the initial calling was when he was back in Ur.
Yeah, back in
I
Ur.
thought that was really interesting, that it just took some time to get there.
Yeah. How does that speak to our lives? Things ever really always, like when we talk about getting on board with God, does ever always change as fast and as quickly as we want and hope sometimes? And following God's direction in life sometimes takes a little more time than what we give it credit for, right? Let's put it this way. It's a journey. This whole life is a faith journey. And we're learning to lean on God every day, every week, every month, every year, throughout the rest of our lives. And ultimately, in that journey of, if we'll just follow and listen to what God has to say, follow his direction, where does it put us? In the land that he promised. The land that he's aiming us toward. Which when we get to the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 11, he says about Abram, he didn't even get to live in the land that God was promising. That was only his descendants who were going to get to live there. Instead, what was he aiming for? He was going for a bigger or a better city, a heavenly land. And that's what Abram's promise really ended up involving, not just some earthly land. Sometimes we get so fixated on the blessings here and wanting the blessings here that it's easy to forget about the greater blessings that are far beyond this. And Abram had the sight to look beyond just here and now. So, all right, let's go ahead and stop there. Thank you all for your kind of attention on all this, and let's pick up with this question 6 next time. There's a number of things to look at there. So, all right. Any announcements that need to be made? We do have the men's breakfast tomorrow at 9 o'clock at Copper Kettle, right? So, and then anything else? Hi.
You said men's breakfast tomorrow?
Yeah.
Where is it at?
At Copper Kettle, 9 o'clock.
Copper Kettle, where's that?
So that's just right down past the Spirit gas station, right past Courthouse Cafe.
Okay.
Right next to the Spirit gas station, right there.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're welcome to come if you'd like to come.